Cimo is here on the channel, and we're going to play a game. Are you ready to play a game?
Oh, I love games. That's why we're card game players. Of course we love games. I'm down for a game. What do you got for me, CGB? What do you got?
Yeah. So you have a sweet Yu-Gi-Oh channel, and I want to know, when Yu-Gi-Oh cards are about to come out, when they're releasing a new set, do they like give out, like, do they show the community in advance like some previews of what's in the set?
So Yu-Gi-Oh, I think, might be different from most card games. Most of the time, the sets are first released actually in Asia before we get them here in the US or Europe. And so we actually know pretty much the contents of the entire set months ahead of time because Asia's a couple sets ahead of us. So it kind of ruins spoilers for us, but we sometimes get TCG exclusive cards that they make for our region first, and then Asia gets a little bit later. So that's usually the stuff that we're kind of hyped for.
So you don't have good old typical preview season.
No, our preview season sort of just follows the Asian regions because we'll see the news posts and they get translated and then get distributed around. And so we still get excited for the new cards, but we don't get to really play with those cards for like several months. So that kind of kills the buzz a bit. Good. This might be a challenge for you. We'll see. I'm very curious how this goes because we are playing underrated, overrated. Okay. I am going to show you pairs of cards, all right? There'll be two cards before you. One will be a card that the Magic the Gathering community vastly overrated in previous season. Okay. And the other is going to be a card that they underrated during previous season. Sounds fun.
So you're going to try to figure out which was which one got the Magic community's jellies going, and which one maybe didn't. But should have.
Well, Nadu's banned now, so I'm sure the Magic community is united now in the fact that they don't have to worry about that anymore.
Dude. Okay, this is so funny. We had to talk about this before we dived in with Rarin on this as well. All right. So they released an article with the ban.
I saw.
Yeah.
We're still waiting for our ban list as TCG players at the time of recording this, by the way. Anyway, go on.
Guess what? They didn't foresee the interaction with some uncommon named Shuko from so long ago and never play tested it, and the bulk binder exploded. And yep, absolutely perfect. Also, for anybody who checked out the Rarin collab, these will be the same pairs. I will try to provide almost exactly the same context. They might be in a different order, so if you didn't finish that video, you might see something you haven't seen yet. And if you didn't finish the video, what the hell's wrong with you? You have to. But we're going to see which of you is better at getting in the mind of the Magic community and their infinite wisdom and perfect track record of evaluating cards before playing with them. Are you ready?
Well, now that I know that I'm competing against Rarin, I have to try hard because I can't let him win in the slightest. So let's do it.
All right. First pair.
God, I feel like I'm at such a disadvantage, though. Hearthstone and Magic are at least like comparable. Yu-Gi-Oh, like you've done a few videos now on my channel, and I've shown you some Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and you just the power level of our cards are just in a vastly different dimension. But I'll try my best.
When everything's free, apparently, apparently you start from a different baseline.
We set a new bar. That's for sure. Anyway, I'm prolonging the inevitable here. Okay, Doomscar. It is 3 mana, 2 white, so it costs 5. It is a sorcery. Destroy all creatures. Seems pretty good. Foretell is 1 and 2 white. During your turn, you may pay 2 and exile this card from your hand face down. Hey, we can do that in Yu-Gi-Oh. Cast it on a later turn for its Foretell cost. Okay, so this is kind of cool. So basically, if you invest the 2 mana ahead of time, you can play this for cheaper on a later turn. Also, you could just play it potentially. I don't know why you'd want to play a Doomscar on turn 3, but hypothetically, you could play this on turn 2, foretell it, and then on turn 3, pay the 3 and Doomscar, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, I'm just making sure that's how that works. That's kind of cool, though, that you like sort of pay up front for part of the cost and then paid like the other part later. Not that I know anything about cost since I play Yu-Gi-Oh! Anyway, divide by 0. You can't do that. 2 and a water. Instant. Return target spell or permanent with mana value 1 or greater to its owner's hand. And then it has Learn. You may reveal a lesson card you own from outside the game and put it into your hand or discard a card to draw a card. Do I get to know what lesson cards are, or for the purposes of this, do I not need to know?
No, I will show you some lessons. There were several of them printed in the set Strixhaven. There might have been like 10 to 15 lesson cards that have various effects on the game. They could all be described as a very medium effect for the cost. And the way that they worked in tournament Magic was you would pull them out of your sideboard into your hand. So they had to use a sideboard slot, your 15 card sideboard.
Interesting.
Here are the two most popular lessons from that format.
You know, as crazy as Yu-Gi-Oh is, we haven't branched into like being able to take cards out of the side deck mid-game yet. And I'm kind of surprised because Yu-Gi-Oh is kind of the game that does everything that other card games don't. So that's kind of shocking to me. Anyway, Environmental Sciences. This is cost 2. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. You gain 2 life. So when you use Divide by Zero and Learn, you're just adding this card to your hand. You still have to pay the cost for it. But it's like getting an extra card, essentially, correct?
That's right.
Okay. And then Mascot Exhibition. This costs 7. That's expensive. It's a sorcery lesson. Create a 2/1 white and black Inkling creature token with flying, a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token, and a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token. You know, I love how CGB, I show you some of the most simple Yu-Gi-Oh cards imaginable, and then you show me, this is what you start me off with. I really appreciate it. You know, you're so kind. You're so kind. You love to see me spin,
you did so well in the last video. I'm just taking the gloves off. And you know what? Raren didn't complain about the complexity. I'm just going to put that out there.
Okay. All right. So I guess I do know something about Magic where you know nothing about Yu-Gi-Oh. So I guess we're sort of at two different angles here. But so there's a lot to process here. The Doomscar, I think, is just the simplest one because it's just a board wipe that you can potentially determine, like, at what point you can, like, activate it without it really... You can modulate the mana cost as to, like, you don't have to play this on 5. You can, like, preemptively play it on, like, 2 or 3 if you have no better play. And if you're foretelling this, it goes face down, so your opponent doesn't know what the card is, which is very Yu-Gi-Oh-esque, which I like. And I'm assuming there are other foretell cards. Can you answer me, are there other good foretell cards during this time that people would want to play?
There are other good foretell cards, and there are even some in, like, similar colors. So, yeah, there are other good foretell cards. Okay.
Because with Yu-Gi-Oh, every trap card is a card you'd play face down, and every monster potentially is a monster you could play face down, even though by modern standards, that's not very likely to happen. So the pool, especially because we're in Eternal format, is so large, right? So the having to run through your mind, doing the mental gymnastics of figuring out what the cards are, yeah, for the most part, you can probably narrow it down, but there's still a lot of unknowns there, where with Foretell and with Magic, specifically rotating formats, there's probably a limited pool of cards that if your opponent is foretelling, especially if you know they're in certain colors, it's going to be like one of, 5 or 6 things, I imagine. But okay. So that's almost akin to like a secret then in Hearthstone. Interesting. And then Divide by Zero is like a weird card to evaluate simply because I'm assuming mana value refers to the total cost of the card, correct?
That's right, yes.
Didn't they used to call it converted mana cost or something
They did, but that's more letters than mana value,
that's true.
They changed it.
Coming from the game that doesn't use keywords, we're used to as many words as possible. But this is hard for us to evaluate because I feel like a card like Divide by Zero is valued a lot higher in a game like Magic versus in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because in Magic, you have to pay the resources to like replay that card. Where in Yu-Gi-Oh, we have bounce effects like this, and they can be good, but the problem is you can just replay the card immediately. Unless there are like very specific circumstances that make it so that that's not the case. So something like this, I feel like, is better in a game like yours than in our game.
Sure. Free is really good, dude. I
haven't
don't know if we've covered this before.
Okay. And so you get to... It costs 3 to bounce, which seems I don't think that's like too expensive, but you also get to learn, so you're getting like a card that replaces it too. And if these are the 2 cards you're showing me here, you basically get a card that can like potentially ramp you, give you a little bit of life back, or you take this mascot exhibition, which is like this late game sort of bomb thing that you just get for playing this card anyway. It's hard because these are two drastically different effects. Like one's just a board wipe, and the other one just does like 4 things.
And it's not about, although it does help to figure out how good a card is, it is about what people would think of this card and what might excite them.
True. I think it would excite people at the prospect that you get to play a board wipe. Let me rephrase that. It would excite people that you would get to pay for part of a board wipe ahead of time. And then at some point, you get to play that board wipe, and then you could still do something with the rest of your turn. Like, the way I see this playing out is you foretell this on, like, 2 or 3 or something, if you have some excess mana. And then at some point in the game, the board gets out of hand and you need to do a reset. So you Doomscar for 3, you foretell it, and then let's say it's like turn 7 and you have 7 mana. You only have to pay 3 to do that. So you wipe the board and you're actually able to reestablish board presence because you have initiative and you're able to actually play something. Whereas if you played this for 5, you might not be able to do that with only 2 mana. I could see people getting excited about that prospect, which is, if based on the game that we're playing, would make me to think that people might overvalue this, and it actually wasn't really that good in practice. Because, like, I also don't know, like, what a board wipe rate typically is in Magic, so I don't know if this is, like, on rate. I don't know if this is overvalued because you get to do that. So that's a bit difficult to evaluate. I can't really see people getting, like, not excited about a board wipe. I can't be... I guess, but if it's like, it's a board wipe...
You can ask questions if you want to.
Yeah, but what fun is that?
Okay.
I could... Let me think about this the other way. If I undervalue this board wipe because it's just a board wipe, and it's like, okay, cool, it's a board wipe that I can pay a little bit up front. But then it ends up being crazy, especially because it's foretell, and you guys aren't used to playing with hidden information that's on the field. I could see that maybe being deceptively powerful, given this mechanic, if you're not, like, super familiar with it. And so if that's true, then that means people overvalue divide by 0. Let me think the alternative now. If people undervalue divide by 0 because it's maybe a bit expensive for an instant, but it bounces anything with mana value 1 or greater. That's a lot. And you're getting an extra card in addition to that. I think I like my logic here. I think because Doomscar is a card that people are a lot more equipped to evaluate, because divide by 0, I feel like there's like a lot to it. And I feel like divide by 0 might be one of those cards where people read it at first. They're like, okay, this is like okay. But then the way the meta develops, people might realize, oh, this is actually just like really good. Like that card we discussed in the previous video I filmed with you. What was it? That like Saga, it was like the red Saga card that was like, it wasn't like flashy necessarily, but it was just like a lot of really good value for a single card.
Fable the Mirror Breaker.
Yeah, Fable the Mirror Breaker. Yeah, I feel like this is sort of giving me those vibes where like on the surface, this is kind of like, but then like people realize, oh, this is actually really good. And I feel like when you get to newer cards and you're unfamiliar with like, you know, these lesson cards and things like that, I feel like it's easier to evaluate a board wipe and just think that, oh yeah, this seems crazy, and it might not be good. And it ends up like not being good because it's just kind of like whatever. So I'm gonna guess that. I think Doomscar was overrated and Divide by 0 was underrated. Final answer.
Okay. Before I reveal it, this isn't for an extra point or anything. I'm just curious of your thoughts. What if I told you one of these cards was banned? Do you think that's possible?
Really? Well, I mean, you could be messing with me. It could not be banned.
Could not be banned?
I'm saying you could be messing with me, just asking me that.
I could be. I could be. It's kind of fun.
One of these was banned? I can't. Really?
Maybe.
Maybe.
You don't think so, huh? Your gut says no?
My gut's saying no, but like your game is just so different. I could maybe see like I can't see them just banning a board wipe. Like surely not. You have so many board wipes in the game. I can't. If they banned a card, I feel like they would ban Divide by Zero. Maybe.
All right.
Because I can see
ready?
that just being really annoying. I can see just like the bouncing and like everything with learning, especially if you have multiple copies of this card. I don't know. So yeah, sure. Enlighten me. Enlighten me to which of these cards is banned, if any of them.
So let's start with Doomscar.
Okay.
In preview season, the thing that you need to know the most is that while there are board wipes in basically every set, and 5 mana has been a very normal rate, if not slightly above rate for a board wipe, 4 being kind of the best board wipes are 4 mana. There had not been a 3 mana board wipe. And this very much to many people read as a 3 mana destroy all creatures board wipe.
Sure.
Which on the internet in the year this came out, let's say 2021, read as aggro is unplayable. Creatures are banned. It's over. So Doomscar went on to be a very, very good card. It saw plenty of play, and there were other foretell cards in the deck. So there was definitely the cat and mouse game of I foretell this card, and the opponent being like, oh God, what if it's a Doomscar? And yeah, that was a feel bad for aggro mages. But the hype on this card in preview season was like end of the world levels, much like the card looks like. Like creatures are unplayable. And that was not the case. There were very good creature decks in the format throughout the entirety of Doomscar's legality. Doomscar fluctuated in play. Sometimes it was played a lot. I played it a lot because I'm a control mage, but there were plenty of decks that did not play Doomscar that could have. There were plenty of times that decks didn't play 4 Doomscars even though they could have. So I would say that Doomscar was very overrated, and I think most people would agree was overrated in previous season.
Yes. Good card. I want to say, I didn't think the card's bad by any means.
Yep. Divide by Zero was a card that I literally didn't see on anybody's top 10 list, which is really funny in hindsight because Doomscar was like number 2 and number 1 on a ton of top 10 lists. It was like way up there. Everybody was very afraid of that card. I didn't even consider this card for standard play until I saw another content creator playing it, and I think I tried 1 or 2 copies. The thing about Divide by Zero is the return target spell or permanent to owner's hand was incredibly oppressive in the format, because the fact that you could just set them back on any spell they cast that was like 3, 4, 5 mana, any expensive spell, get some kind of an upside from it by getting a lesson out of your sideboard, and the fact that it just didn't trigger its enter the battlefield ability because you could just return it while it was on the stack to the hand.
Ooh, okay.
Or if you tapped out and did something and they cast something big, you could untap and Divide by Zero and set them back that way. So it wasn't like you had to worry about the timing windows with the card. And the fact that it doesn't counter the spell, it returns the spell. This minor little wording on the card meant that even if the opponent played an uncounterable card like Coma the Cosmos Serpent, a big monster that said can't be countered on it, you're like, oh darn, Divide by Zero. It just goes back to your hand and did nothing. It's so brutal. It was absolutely brutal. The learn mechanic was new. It hadn't been done before. People looked at lessons and in previous season thought it would be a mechanic for the limited, for like draft, right? For sealed, because these are just bad rates. You know, if you look at environmental sciences on its own, it's a bad rate. If you look at mascot exhibition on its own, you wouldn't just play that card in a deck. It's too expensive.
But if it's free,
and you know, you get that flexibility of one or the other depending on the state of the game you're in. Yep, it turns out to be really good. And were either of these banned? Yes, Divide by Zero got banned.
That's insane. Wow.
It's one of, I still think it's one of the most controversial bans, but Divide by Zero got banned from the standard format for just being too good, I guess. It's still kind of wild and unclear, but
you guys don't really ban stuff in standard very often, do you? Because usually it was just rotate out.
They try to avoid it. They really do. And there was a blue-red, like, control-ish, tempo-ish deck at the time that was very powerful in the meta, and they decided that Divide by Zero was the card from it that really had to be slowed down. They took another card from it as well that I might show you someday, so we're not going to talk about that.
Sure.
But Divide by Zero is one of the more interesting cards to ever be banned, for sure, and a card that nobody that I saw in a top 10 list, that nobody talked about in previous season, that absolutely nobody saw coming. So
it's so fascinating. So fascinating.
You got the first one right. How do you feel? You're basically a god among Magic players right now.
Feel good. I'm probably already doing better than Rarin, so that's good.
I'm just gonna keep that to myself for now. All right, next pair.
All right, what do we got? Tybalt the Fiend Blooded. I like how he's like coming out of the frame. That's really cool. 2 red to play this guy. It's a Planeswalker. It is a 2 loyalty Planeswalker. +1, draw a card, then discard a card at random. -4, which means it would take 3 turns to actually do this. Tybalt the Fiend Blooded deals damage equal to the number of cards in target player's hand to that player. Deals damage equal to the number of cards in target player's hand to that player. So I'm assuming it's however many. So if I have 6 cards, I use the -4, then I take 6 damage, correct?
I mean, you would target the opponent.
Yeah. Sure. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry. I should have clarified that, but it's the owners.
You have a weird idea of what to do with this card already. I like where this is going.
Well,
Keep evaluating.
I was clarifying it's the owner's hand is the damage. It's not like I target my hand and then the opponent takes the damage. That's what I was clarifying. I don't know why. The way it's worded kind of confused me. Anyway, -6, gain control of all creatures until end of turn. Untap them, they gain haste until end of turn. That's so cute. You guys have to give everything haste to make it good. Anyway.
Oh my God.
Nexus of Fate. That's a really cool name and cool art. I love Magic art. I will say, like, even though I'm like a Yu-Gi-Oh player through and through, Magic art is just really awesome a lot of the time. This is a
Thank
5.
you. We'll take it.
5 and 2 blue. This is expensive. It's an instant though. Take an extra turn after... Oh, God. You guys in the extra... How many extra turn effects do you guys have? Take an extra turn after this one. If Nexus of Fate would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, reveal Nexus of Fate and shuffle it into its owner's library instead. That does not sound right. That does not sound right. Okay. You can also play 4 of this, too. That's something... I don't know if you would actually play 4 of it, but, you know...
In tournament Magic, yes.
Yes. Okay. So... God. See, this feels like bait. This just feels like such bait.
What are you talking about?
I feel like you specifically picked these because it's like... Nexus seems like the broken card in some capacity, and then, like, Tybalt just seems, like, unassuming. And so I feel like the natural instinct is to say Nexus of Fate was overrated... and then, like, was bad. But that would assume that Tybalt is broken. And, like, I'm not seeing it, like, on face value. Because unless there's... I guess Tybalt being only 2 mana is, like, maybe useful in some capacity. I don't like that you discard a card at random unless the deck you're trying to play has, like, these effects that trigger when things are either discarded or sent to the graveyard or whatever. That's like the only reason I could see that being good. Because if it was draw a card, discard a card, I feel differently. The fact that it's random, I feel like makes this card infinitely worse. And like, you're telling me this thing's going to survive for 3+ turns to use like its -4 or its -6? I don't know. That seems like you're living in... I'll steal it from Rare. That sounds like Disneyland to me. But like... It seems too obvious. Like, we've only done a couple of these videos together, but I feel like you're already, like, setting up the mind games for this. I guess, okay.
Give me a lot of credit.
Let me think about Nexus. So Nexus is 7 to do this effect. I know Magic has, like, we saw it in the last video. You guys have effects that give you extra turns. I don't know, similar to the board wipe, I don't know what the base rate is for taking an extra turn in this game. So I don't know if 7 is where it is. I don't know if it's like 5. I don't know if it's 10. I have no idea. But all this does is give you an extra turn. It does shuffle itself back into the deck. So if there are like some gimmicky ways to like get it back, even though you could play multiple copies of it anyway, if there's ways to like continuously do this, maybe there's something there. Just because of the context of the game, this is what's messing with me. Because like Nexus of Fate clearly seems like the better card, but that would assume to me, or that tells me that people did not think this was good initially. And like, maybe I'm just Yu-Gi-Oh brained, but getting extra turns seems nuts. So if I'm to assume Nexus of Fate is the good card here, I would have to assume people thought Nexus of Fate was bad on announcing it, which means I'd also have to assume Tibalt was overvalued on release and ended up being garbage. Maybe not garbage, because the white board wipe, it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad.
Yep, it's just about the hype relative to how much it actually did.
Correct. You're wrecking my brain with this one. This is messed up. This is messed up. I think I have to go with my gut, and I think I would rather be wrong here just because I don't know Magic as a game that well. I would love for you to tell me that Tibalt is like just the craziest card ever printed. So I'm going to assume that Nexus was underrated and became like the best card ever in some capacity. And then Tibalt was overrated and ended up not being that good. There has to be something I'm missing with Tibalt because this does not seem particularly good to me. So lay it on me.
The case with Tibalt is that this was the first ever 2-mana Planeswalker. The first time that they've ever put a Planeswalker out at just 2 mana.
What's like the base rate for one?
Well, there were some good 3-mana ones, but they're very hard to come by. 4 and 5 mana, very normal for a Planeswalker.
Okay.
And because the loyalty tends to stack up, and as the opponent is in the process of developing a board, the thing that kind of checked Planeswalkers, especially back then when it was hard to use spells to remove them, the thing that checked them was attacking them with creatures. So if you get a Planeswalker down early and start using its plus abilities early before the opponent even has any creatures, it becomes very hard for the opponent to eventually reach the Planeswalker. They use removal spells, they use blockers, and they defend the Planeswalker until they get their ultimate, which in this case was a very difficult one, as people would say, for them to play around, because if they hold back, the -4 domes them and hits them in the head. And if they play out their creatures, the -6 steals all the creatures and then beats them to death with them. So either way, it was going to be very hard to play around a Tibalt that came down on turn 2 and started plussing right away. And when people thought about that play pattern, they got really excited because they'd never seen a 2-mana Planeswalker before. And as it would turn out, once or twice seeing Tibalt in play, everybody realized that just wasn't very good. That the discarding at random was terrible. Okay, and Tibalt was very overrated in previous season. Nexus of Fate, it's not that nobody saw it. There were some people sounding a few alarm bells, but there were some interesting things about Nexus of Fate. We just did a video where you talked about all the different ways that they release Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Nexus of Fate was a new one for Magic at the time. If you see down there, it says it was a buy a box promo, right?
Okay.
In M19. This meant this wasn't in booster packs. You could not open this in a booster pack. You had to buy a box, and you would get a Nexus of Fate little single with it.
Yu-Gi-Oh's never done anything like that for context.
Right. And there was, obviously, Nexus of Fate had a big impact on how this promotion was treated in the future. Because first there were people being like, well, they didn't evaluate it as part of the set. because it was kind of just tacked on, right?
Sure.
It was also insanely expensive. For an extra turn, Time Warp was pretty damn amazing at 5 mana. Okay. But other cards like Part the Water Veil that followed it and Walk the Aeons didn't break the formats they were in. They were good, but not broken cards at 6 mana. This is 7 mana. It had also been a little while since an extra turn spell had appeared in Standard. And I think people looked at the cost and the fact that Wizards felt that they could just make it a buy a box promo, which many people thought of as that must mean that it's not that much of a chase rare, because it would be egregious, right, to put a must-have card as the buy a box promo.
Sure.
They took this as not a real part of the set, and it did take a while. Nexus of Fate didn't come out of the gate swinging, but within a year of release, it did rise to prominence as one of the best decks in the format. It did win a Mythic Championship in decks that were designed to ramp up the mana and cast it over and over again while using effects that kind of thinned their deck down to just a handful of Nexus of Fates left in the library. This is one of the only cards in Magic history to be banned in Best of One, because people would play it in decks with no win cons and just empty their deck except for Nexus of Fate and just cast it over and over until their opponent conceded, because there's no time limit in Best of One. So
That's amazing.
Got banned. So,
oh my God. Okay. It's funny that like the perception of the card was because it was a buy a box promo that it was bad. I think that's just like a fun element of people evaluating it. Like, oh, surely they wouldn't just give us like one of the best cards that was like in this set as a buy a box promo.
Yeah, and totally transparent, there were people who said this card would be very good, but the community as a whole, I think, I feel strongly, having been there, I feel like the community underrated it quite a bit.
I see.
And it very much had, I think if they went back and looked at M19 objectively, it's probably the best card in the set, and several people didn't even have it on their top 10.
Fascinating. I guess it makes sense, though, because if you said the base rate for like a turn skip is around 5, then like, sure, you have to have like the right deck to really take advantage of this, I feel like. So I could see this being, especially if you guys are already used to extra turn stuff. Like, it just took someone cracking it to figure it out.
Yep. Speaking of cracking it.
Ooh, okay. We got here Umezawa's Jite. It is a 2-mana legendary artifact equipment. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage, put 2 charge counters on Umezawa's Jite. Remove a charge counter from this, choose one. Either equipped creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn, or target creature gets -1/1 until end of turn. You gain 2 life, and it's an equip cost of 2. Okay. Let me ask this. I don't know how much this matters or not, but are you allowed to remove multiple counters on this card, like in the same turn, or can you only do that once?
You can remove as many counters as you have whenever you like.
Got it. Okay. Just wanted to clarify. I wasn't sure because it didn't say you could only do it once or anything, but I guess that would make sense. All right. And then the comparable card here, potentially, Assassin's Trophy, which is a black and a green. This is an instant. Destroy target permanent an opponent controls. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle their library. That's pretty good considering it doesn't really have... I know a lot of removal in Magic, at least from like the little that I've seen, usually has like conditions attached to it where it's like, kill something that has like 2 or less power, or, you know, do this or that. And so this just destroys... Oh, also it destroys a permanent. And a permanent is not just a creature. I missed that the first time. Okay, so this can actually just deal with a lot of stuff. And at the exchange of giving your opponent a land and letting them get ahead on mana. Interesting. Okay. Where do I start? I feel like the Jite is very hard for me to evaluate. Like, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has equip spells, but for the most part, I want to say they're all really bad. So, I mean, maybe that's true for Magic. Like, maybe that's... I'm not sure. So, you equip... It has to deal combat damage for one. So, you need to have creature, you need to spend 2 mana to play this, and then you need to also spend 2 mana to equip this. So you either have to do... I'm trying to just think of some example here. You play this on like... You play like a creature on turn 1. You play this on turn 2. Turn 3, you can actually equip this thing to it, get in, you get the counters on. Your opponent can still block this, so you don't really have agency. But dealing combat damage is just damaging anything, right? Whether it's a creature or an opponent, correct?
Yep.
Okay,
yep,
yep. Any damage will get you the counters. And then now here's a question. If the creature dies in combat, so let me say I attack with a creature, equip with Jite. You block, and your blocker is going to kill my attacker. Does the Jite still get the counters in that exchange?
The Jite would get the counter as long as your creature did some damage to the other creature.
So even if my creature dies, the Jite still gets the counters.
As a result of the damage from the opposing creature, as long as your creature also damaged the opposing creature,
gotcha.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. And then if the creature dies, Jite still retains the counters.
Yes.
Okay.
The counters are on the Jite, not on the creature.
Gotcha. Okay. And see, that's a big difference between this and Yu-Gi-Oh! Because Yu-Gi-Oh! The equip spells are tied to the creature, so if the creature dies, the equip spell dies with it. Where in Magic, like, someone else can pick it back up is always how I imagine it. It's just kind of like there. Interesting. So in that case, over the course of a game, you could keep equipping this 2 things to keep building up charge counters. And then you could spend all the charge counters to try to get like a huge hit in or something, or do some stupid thing. But you have to spend 2 mana to equip it every single time, unless there's a way to like bypass that. This is a really hard card to evaluate for me. Assassin's Trophy is a bit more straightforward. And it seems good. It seems pretty decent. And now, the weird thing is, though, you're letting your opponent ramp by a land. And I'm not sure, like, how much people in Magic value that. Because obviously, if they get ahead on mana, that means they have more resources to play more cards. And that's not necessarily a good thing for you as someone playing this card. But maybe you like the flexibility that you can destroy anything with this, and that's, like, okay. I need to think of this in the context of our game, right? I need to think about, on paper, would someone look at this card and think that this is crazy? And then maybe it wasn't as crazy as it was later on. I don't think you can look at Assassin's Trophy seems like a good card. This seems like a good card. At least at face value. Do I think people overhyped this versus underhyped this? I can see people underhyping it because maybe they don't like the fact that their opponent gets a land. And then it ends up being really good as a result of that, because like then maybe people are like, oh, the land doesn't matter because I'd rather have the flexibility. That's really interesting. Conversely, they could overhype Assassin's Trophy, not care about the fact that they give their opponent a land, and then maybe it's just not as good as people thought it was. I think it really just boils down to how much people value giving their opponent a little extra ramping at the end of it all.
It is curious what you think of that as somebody who just plays everything
for free.
Because everything's
free! Everything's free! It's just going to be the meme between us at this point. Everything's free. I feel like I really have to base my decision on Assassin's Trophy, because I feel like it's really too difficult for me to evaluate the Jite.
You're not even sure if it's good. Not even sure if it's good, bad.
I think there's so much context surrounding this card, and just because the game is so fundamentally different than what I'm used to, I think it's really tough for me to like determine whether this card is good or not. So I actually think I'm going to put all my stock into the Assassin's Trophy and hope that that gets me there and keeps my perfect record so far. I think people thought that Assassin's Trophy was going to be bad because it gives your opponent a land. So it was underrated. And then people realized that it didn't matter because you'd rather just have something that can pop anything if you are in these two colors. And that just is a card your deck can play. It's like the most flexible removal. It only costs 2, which seems really cheap. It's at instant speed. But I really think the big hang up here is giving your opponent a land may have just seemed really bad. But like if your opponent doesn't have anything to do with that mana, then that doesn't matter. So if the game progresses to a point where you're in like more simplified game state, then you could give, it doesn't, there's a point where the lands are superfluous, right? Like the land just becomes irrelevant. And this card is just destroy something your opponent has. Oh, but does that mean people overrated it then? God, this is hard. Oh my God. Why are you doing this to me, CGB?
Because it's fun and it's for entertainment.
I guess. I'm going to stick with my gut. I think people underrated it because of the fact it gave your opponent a land. And then, which means I think people overrated Umezawa's Jite as a result. And I am very curious to learn where this card falls in Magic's history, period. Because I'm sure there's like a whole long story you have prepared for this card, and I thoroughly am looking forward to see this. So I think Assassin's Trophy was underrated, Jite was overrated. Final answer.
Umezawa's Jite has a lot of text on it.
It does.
And that probably does influence a lot of its legacy. Umezawa's Jite came out after one of the more busted sets of all time in a set called Betrayers of Kamigawa. And the Kamigawa block in general was treated by Magic players with a certain amount of malaise because the Mirrodin block before it was absolutely insanely busted and resulted in a ton of banned cards. The power level was too high. Kamigawa was the chill that came afterwards. Okay. So when the second Kamigawa set came out, and this was one of the rares, people were not excited about Umezawa's Jite. And man, once they played with it, this card took over games. It just absolutely took over games so fast.
Interesting.
Because the moment something had a few charge counters with this thing, well, for one thing, every creature became a threat because any creature with a power on it could make a charge counter. And then every creature after it almost always won in combat. This card was so monumental in Standard that at the time the Legend rule was written in such a way that whoever played a legendary artifact like Umezawa's Jite is, if the opponent also played one, there couldn't be, the paradox, and they would both die. Like that was the rule at the time. So people actually ran, because there wasn't artifact removal in certain colors, people actually ran 4 copies of this card just to play to destroy the opponent's copy.
That's so funny. Oh
yes.
My God.
Yes. So Umezawa's Jite was the underrated card, as people really didn't realize how absolutely defining it would be. They weren't impressed with it on first glance. Assassin's Trophy was the overrated card, and you circled so many things correctly, but you have more in common with Magic players than you think, because Magic players looked at this and was like, oh my God, that it really was unheard of. 2 mana, instant speed, destroy anything. Almost all removal for the modern age of Magic had a drawback or a restriction, and mostly it was restriction. Go for the Throat can destroy any creature but not an artifact creature. Terror can destroy any creature but not a black creature. Like, there were usually limiting factors on 2 mana removal spells. Sure. But Assassin's Trophy was there saying anything. Want to hit a land? We'll hit a land. Want to hit an enchantment? We'll hit an enchantment. And people immediately saw that and were like, oh my God, nothing is safe. Nothing is safe. And they disregarded the fact that they're giving up a land. And the free land was often a huge problem for Assassin's Trophy, and the issue with running like 4 copies. People quickly realized you do not want to cast Assassin's Trophy in the first 3 turns of the game. You're going to ramp your opponent out so significantly ahead of you, and they still have cards in hand, so they're going to take advantage of it. And so the card was basically unplayable if you drew it early.
Interesting.
unplayable if you drew it early. So running 4 copies didn't make sense. Assassin's Trophy would go on to be like a 1 or 2 of in a number of decks. It's currently legal and standard. Most decks that could play it do not play it.
Interesting. Wow.
But if they do, it's like 1 copy.
I think the GT is really interesting too, because Yu-Gi-Oh, even in old Yu-Gi-Oh, which is like more like Magic in a lot of ways, is the amount of like focus on like creature combat, I feel like by especially modern Yu-Gi-Oh standards, is almost non-existent. Like there's just so much hard removal in Yu-Gi-Oh that combat almost gets trivialized so many times, where it's like you never have to worry about, you know, just something like the stats really don't matter all that much. And we've talked about that in some of my videos. And so it's interesting, like seeing a card like this, and it's like, if this existed in Yu-Gi-Oh, this would just like be unplayable. But like for Magic, this is like one of the craziest cards ever for the time. That's like just really fascinating to learn about. That's cool. I get it though too. Like it makes sense when you put it in context.
It's still a very good commander card too. Like decks that use equipment a lot absolutely love it.
Sure. I love that they played copies of it to destroy other copies of it because of the legend rule. That's so funny.
They had to change that rule because of this card specifically, because it's colorless. Every deck could play it.
That's amazing. That's so funny. There was something that happened similarly in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where there was a card that I don't remember if I showed you field spells at all, but there's a card that could give your opponent a field spell, and then because it was a card that couldn't be activated because it had a requirement on activation, you weren't allowed to activate it. So people would play the card in their deck to counter their opponent who did that to them, so they could then activate the card for a very short time. It was very stupid.
Dude, technology. It's clever.
Yeah,
it
was bad. It was awful. It was awful. Anyway, more cards. These guys look neat. Savage Knuckleblade is a green, a blue, and a red. So we got a tri-type. It is an ogre warrior. Very vicious looking guy. 2 in green, Savage Knuckleblade gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Activate this ability only once each turn. Okay, so you can't just like keep pump. Because if I recall, if there's like mana abilities like this, you could theoretically activate it as much as you want, assuming you have the mana, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Unless it says activate only once each turn. All right, 2 in a blue, return Savage Knuckleblade to its owner's hand. Okay, so it could be like sticky if you wanted to dodge something. Neat. And then for a red, they're off theme here. This should be 2 in a red. For a red, Savage Knuckleblade gains haste until end of turn. That's pretty cool. It like offsets the fact that if you bounce it back to hand, you could just get right back to hitting. All right, neat. And then Desecration Demon. That's a hell of a name for a card. 2 and 2 black. It is a demon. I would hope so. It's in the name. Flying. At the beginning of each combat, any opponent may sacrifice a creature. If it does, tap Desecration Demon and put a +1/+1 counter on it. That seems oppressive and kind of annoying. So I'm trying to think about how this would work. So I play this on 4. Now let me ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
Can you play Desecration Demon on 4 and go to your combat step and force your opponent to sacrifice? Oh no, they don't have to. They wouldn't have to because it can't attack.
They have the
that
option.
So right. I think you see.
They're gonna be like, nah. They're gonna be like, nah. I don't think I'm gonna.
Hey, we don't have summoning sickness in our game. Okay, sorry. All right, I missed that. That's fine. So you play this on 4. It does nothing. It's just a guy. Turn 5 comes around. You go to combat. Maybe you've got some other stuff, and now they have the option to sacrifice a creature to tap this. But then that makes the Desecration Demon bigger. And if your opponent doesn't have anything to sacrifice, then this thing can just get in. And it does have flying, so it can just, like, dodge a lot of things anyway.
I'll also just make sure we're clear. It's at the beginning of each combat, so if the opponent wanted to sack something so it couldn't block, they could do that too.
Oh, okay. I did miss that. Thank you for letting me know. That's an interesting design. It's also weird too because like we don't have blocking in our game, so it's a little bit difficult to evaluate that. Let me go back to the Knuckleblade really quick. So you play this on 3, assuming you have all 3 color types, which isn't like impossible.
This also came out in a set called Cons of Tarkir that was built around these 3 color type like kind of clans. So at this point in standard, it was very doable.
Okay. I appreciate the clarity there. This is just like a guy.
Guy.
It's just a guy. Like it's like
it's a guy.
It's a 3-mana 4/4, which is like pretty, like the stats are good for the cost, but I think because it's like 3 types, that's probably why they can get away with that. But like the issue I see with this card is that you play it on 3. Maybe your opponent doesn't really have anything to do with it. And then next turn, you get all your mana back. So now you have the ability to like protect it or pump it or whatever. But then like you're spending your whole turn to throw it into the Knuckle Blade instead of like developing more of your board. And like, how much mana do you want to spend on this like 4/4? And like, yes, he could become a 6/6 if you have enough mana to do that. But now that I'm thinking this, I'm thinking if I was evaluating this card the first time I saw it, like, okay, would I think this card is not good and this card ended up being crazy? Or with my severely inferior Yu-Gi-Oh brain, is this card like nuts by Magic player standards? And like, it was not good. Like, I don't know. Interesting. And going back to Desecration Demon, I feel like Desecration Demon could be something where people are like, oh, this card is crazy because it's making the opponent sacrifice creatures every single time. Otherwise, you're going to get to hit in with this 6/6 that has flying, and maybe you don't have ways to deal with flyers in your deck. So in my mind, I could see this being overhyped, and then it ended up not being like particularly good, or it was like fine at best, which means that the Knuckle Blade would be underhyped, and then this card ended up being crazy. What's the inverse? The inverse is this card was overhyped and ended up not being very good, which meant the Desecration Demon was underhyped and ended up being insane.
Indeed.
Man, you pulled out all the stops for this one. That's for sure.
I tried to make pairs that would be interesting.
Yeah, when you said pairs, I was expecting the cards to at least be like somewhat similar. Overhyped, overrated, underrated. I want to say beginning of each combat, any opponent may sacrifice a creature. You're forcing them to sacrifice creatures. It is optional, so you're not really forcing them. But if they sacrifice creatures, then they're always falling behind on board. But do they care? Because this thing's just like a 6/6. I think I'm going to go with that Desecration Demon was overrated, because I think people might have seen the opponent like may sacrifice a thing to like tap this. No, do I? Because I can see both being true. I can see people looking at this and thinking like, oh, you know, the opponent has so much agency over what I actually do with this card. But do you care if they're sacrificing stuff every turn and like losing so much of their board?
You must choose.
I must choose. I'm going to reverse my decision. I'm going to say Desecration Demon was underrated and ended up being crazy, and then the Knuckle Blade was overrated, and it was like not particularly good.
You are correct.
Oh my god, I was getting so tense. I'm like, please
that was
don't tell me I'm wrong. That was close. I almost fell into it.
Yeah. This one, if you just evaluate the Knuckle Blade, I think it gets you a long way, because Knuckle Blade is a card that looks like a really good rate at the time. 3 mana for a 4/4 with all upside was pretty unusual.
Sure.
And definitely above rate. But at the end of the day, how much did you really want to use the upside? side, and it was a much more unwieldy card. This was also part of a cycle, whereas all of the 3-color types of cards had a creature rare that had a number of abilities. And Savage Knuckleblade, many people thought would be a very good one, did not turn out to be a very good one. Saw very little competitive play. There was a teamer deck here or there that tried to use it, but for the most part, Savage Knuckleblade was the least played of the 3-color creatures in this set.
That was a roller coaster.
So Desecration Demon is so funny because there are 2 ways to look at it, right? There's the optimist way and the pessimist way.
Yeah.
And the prevailing wisdom online about Magic cards at the time was that when you give your opponent choices, they will make the choice that is best for them. These things called Punisher cards were seen mostly as bad cards by the community because of experiences in the past where a card said something along the lines of, hey, you can either have this or this, they're both bad for you. And the opponent would choose this, and it's bad, but it's not as bad as it should be. Situationally, it's not as bad. And those things generally didn't go the way that the person casting the spell wanted them to. And Desecration Demon, the case that was most posited online was that, well, what if you're behind? What if you play this when you're behind and the opponent has 3 creatures on board? They just play another creature and they sack their smallest creature and they keep attacking you. This thing will never block, right? It doesn't help you when you're behind. And that was the thing that came up a lot. They'll just sacrifice a token or a very small useless 1-drop that they played 5 turns ago to the Desecration Demon and beat you to death. But Desecration Demon was a house. This card was very hard to kill for most decks, and it was played in a deck called Mono Black Devotion that was very good at controlling the board and recovering from being on the back foot, which mitigated the negative effects of the demon.
Sure.
Not only that, if the opponent tapped it down for a few turns but didn't kill you, they died really quick on the backswing when they ran out of creatures. And Desecration Demon was an all-star for its entirety that Mono Black Devotion and even a few other colors like Black White Devotion were in standard.
So was that the focal point of the deck, or was it just a supporting role?
It was support staff. It was support staff for sure. Okay. There were other cards that were real payoffs for the way that the deck was constructed, but a lot of I don't think the deck would have ever been what it was without Desecration Demon taking up that mid spot of putting the opponent in a vice of okay, how do I get past this? How do I keep pressure on the board? How do I prepare for what the deck does next? I'm not going to tell you because we might talk about it someday. But it was Desecration Demon definitely tied the room together. It was that rug that tied everything together.
Neat card.
Yeah, what do you got about this one?
I definitely went through both sides of it with Desecration Demon. All right, let's see. What we got? Demilich? I think that's how you say it. 4 blue. Oh, that's a lot. All right. Creature Skeleton Wizard. This spell costs blue less to cast for each instant and sorcery spell you've cast this turn. Okay, well, that makes up for the fact that it's 4 blue. 4/3, by the way. Forgot to say that. Whenever Demilich attacks, exile up to 1 target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. Copy it. You may cast the copy. Do you have to pay for that card, or is it free?
You have to pay for that card. You may cast when you see the line, you may cast the copy. You have to pay its mana cost.
Sure.
It said if you could play for free, it would say cast this without paying its mana cost.
Imagine paying for costs. Anyway, you may cast Demilich
complicated,
from your graveyard.
Right?
You may cast Demilich from your graveyard by exiling 4 instant and or sorcery cards from your graveyard in addition to paying its other costs. So you still have to pay for the mana. However, if I understand this correctly, let's say, hypothetically, you cast an instant on your turn, which reduce the cost of this by 1 blue. So you could banish 4 instants or sorceries in your graveyard from that point to cast this for 3. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Because, is it still getting the reduction while it's in the graveyard is what I'm asking.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. I think I understand that. And then Cursed Scroll. Man, this card looks ancient. 1 mana artifact, 3 and tap. Name a card. Target opponent chooses a card at random from your hand. If he or she chooses the named card, Curse Scroll deals 2 damage to target creature or player. That is one of the weirdest cards I've ever read in my life. You're paying...
And you read Yu-Gi-Oh cards.
I do read Yu-Gi-Oh. Like, you're paying 3 mana, 4 if you're incorporating the main cost to play it. Target opponent chooses a card at random from your hand. And you named a card. If he or she chooses the named card, it deals 2 damage to the target creature or player.
Yeah, can you imagine giving away that kind of information in Yu-Gi-Oh?
That may or may not be foreshadowing anything in our video. That's so interesting. So it's funny you actually mentioned that. There is a card... I don't even want to say it's similar to this because it does the name a card thing, but the difference is if you call it correctly. So the card's called Mind Crush. How Mind Crush works is I'll call a card, and if you have any copies of that card in your hand, you have to discard them to the graveyard. And so this is like that, but like way worse for like 9 different reasons.
Is that all? You only thought of 9.
Just 9.
Okay.
Just 9. I guess like the difference is instead of ripping the card, it's like you like I'm seeing a world where if you only have 1 card in your hand, right, then they have to keep naming that card, and then you could literally just kill them if you have a way to get to infinite mana, right? So that's like
you can only use it one. It has a tap. Do you see the little tap symbol there?
You can untap cards in this game.
That's true.
You can untap.
I don't know how you do that with 1 card in your hand.
I guess that's fair. I mean, maybe you already have stuff on the board. I don't know. Maybe there's some combo. Whatever. Anyway, let's go back to the Indiana Jones Crystal Skull card.
That doesn't exist. Come on. I guess this is from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, so I guess it's a D&D monster.
Oh, is it? Okay. I know nothing about D&D, so I would never have known that. Okay. Demolich has a lot of words. As a Yu-Gi-Oh player, I'm used to a lot of words. Demolich, to me, seems like a card that would make people go crazy, because like on the surface, it sounds kind of crazy, but then I could see this card like being an absolute letdown. Conversely, I don't know. This seems to me like something... I was going to say that like I could also see people thinking this isn't good, but the fact that you can reduce its cost by so much to basically play it... Let me ask this. If you cast 4 instants or sorceries, can you play this for free?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So like, again, free is good, and especially in a game with resources, free is even better. As a result. So I could see people getting excited, like, oh my god, I can like play this for free if I play like a 1 mana thing and then another 1 mana thing and then like a 2 mana thing or whatever, and then I play this for like 1 or something. I don't know. I could see them just like getting so excited about this and then this card falling short in like so many ways, because even though it attacks, you can copy something, you still have to pay the cost to do that. And like, that's fine. It's not, I think if that was also free, that might make this card even crazier. But it's a recursive threat. If you're playing a deck that's like all spells that makes this thing cost like nothing, then maybe this thing just keeps coming back over and over and over again, especially if it's free. I could see Demolich going both ways the more I talk myself into it. Curse Scroll, this is the weirdest thing ever. I can't.
It really
okay.
is.
The thing with Curse Scroll is I can't see people reading. This is a very old card, so maybe it's like I don't have the context of Magic at the time to know how good or bad of an effect this is. But I can't see someone reading Curse Scroll as a card game player, just generally. I can't see someone reading this card and thinking that this card is insane. Like, I can't see people getting excited about Curse Scroll as a concept unless there's already like a shell or some engine that exists in the game that makes this abusable. It's just on the surface in a vacuum. I don't think this card is something people would get excited for. This just seems like this seems like a bulk card. This seems like something that people would just not care about. So with that said, I think my answer is I think Cursed Scroll is underrated and ended up being like crazy for some reason. And I think Demolich was overrated and ended up not being very good. That's like what my intuition's telling me. But maybe you thought that I was going to think that, and that's why you're showing me this. And maybe Cursed Scroll was seen to be this crazy card because it is an artifact, and if there's not a lot of artifact removal, maybe you're just like destroying stuff, you know, all the time with 2 damage. That seems so unlikely. I'm going to stick with my gut. I think Cursed Scroll's underrated. Demolich is overrated. Final answer.
Your logic does imply that Cursed Scroll is actually good. You know that, right?
But I can't see people even overhyping this card because that's supposed to be overrated.
It does random stuff. People love random.
I don't buy it. I don't buy it. We talked about random in our video. I look forward to learning all about this thoroughly.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Okay.
You're right. Demolich was very overrated because people got really excited about casting a bunch of spells and getting a creature for free that they could then potentially get from the graveyard, etc. Lots of things. And then this card came out. People tried to play it and nobody could make it work. It was such a mythic inferno on MTG Arena. So many mythic wildcards spent on this that were never used again. And it's just a tragedy, to be honest. It's
unfortunate because it seems like a cool card.
It is. It does. Yeah. But for one thing, the all blueness made it very hard for it to have an impact, and just not enough cheap, impactful instants that did useful things really held it back. Cursed Scroll. Nobody was excited about Cursed Scroll, but it went on to, in 1997, be a $20 plus card, which was so much at the time. Because back then, there were a lot of decks couldn't deal with artifacts hardly at all. And the way that the red decks were able to play is like just dump their hand, damage you, play this 1 mana artifact, and then every turn it was like, and pay 3 mana, take 2, pay 3 mana, take 2, pay 3 mana, take 2, now you're dead.
Interesting.
It kind of, it was the backup for a lot of the early aggro decks. One called Suicide Black, people might remember, as well as aggressive red decks, whose whole plan, just play the cheapest, best creatures possible, get the opponent life total into single digits, and then plunk the rest of the way with Cursed Scroll, making it the underrated card in this scenario.
Yeah, I guess if there's like no way to really interact with it, then it's something to funnel all of your mana into then once you've like exhausted your whole hand. I guess that like makes sense, but that's crazy. Okay. All right.
Let's just say mana sinks weren't what they were. Back then, just any use for your mana once you ran out of fast red cards to play was seen as very good.
Interesting.
Ready for the next one?
I think so. I think we're doing okay.
You've got one wrong and you've got 2 to go. So try not to fumble this, okay?
All right. Okay, we beat Raren as soon as we got one right, so we're fine. All right. Obnixilis, the Adversary. This guy's decked out. 1, a black, and a red. It is a legendary planeswalker. This is a lot of, even by Yu-Gi-Oh standards, this is a lot of text. Casualty X. The copy isn't legendary and has starting loyalty X. So as you cast this spell, you may sacrifice a creature with power X. When you do copy this spell, the copy becomes a token. So you're getting an extra token planeswalker that's not legendary, because I imagine they wouldn't be able to be on the field when you do this, correct?
Say that again. Let me be sure.
So when you play this, you're making a token Nixilis planeswalker that's not legendary. So you're getting like 2 of this, but it's not legendary because otherwise they would just, one would have to go, correct? That's how that works?
Yep. You only get 1 of a legendary, but the copy is not legendary.
Gotcha. All right. 3 loyalty, by the way. +1, each opponent loses 2 life unless they discard a card. If you control a demon or devil, you gain 2 life. Each opponent loses 2 life unless they discard a card. All right, we talked about giving the opponent's agency. Sure. -2, create a 1/1 red devil creature token with, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. And then -7, target player draws 7 cards and loses 7 life. We like drawing cards, but that would take you like 10 years to get to that point. But you're getting like a copy of this guy too.
And the copy's loyalty is equal to the power of what you sacrificed.
Right. So if you hypothetically sacrifice a 7 power creature, you could immediately just use the ultimate ability and draw 7 cards. Okay. All right, that was a lot, but that's cool. And then Tarmogoyf, 1 and a green. I do not know how to pronounce that. Lurgoyf? Is that what that is?
Sure. Yeah, we'll go with that.
Tarmogoyf's power is equal to the number of card types among cards in all graveyards, and its toughness is equal to that number plus 1. So, by card types, are we talking like creature, sorcery, like those card types?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
It's equal to that, and then the toughness is equal to that plus 1. So if you have let's say you use like a sorcery, an instant, and say something dies, and you play this is like a 3/4, correct?
It depends on the contents of all graveyards, but I think you're on the right track, yeah.
All graveyards. Oh, it's all. So your opponent is counted in that as well. All right, got it. I was just saying yours for that purpose, but yeah, sure.
So
opponent makes that even crazier.
I made you a nice little list of the types.
Oh, you're so
you
kind.
have an idea of like how many types there are.
Creature, instant, sorcery, enchantment, artifact, land. Oh, land's counted in that too. That's pretty good. Planeswalker, fringe types, invasion, and kindred. If you're saying it's fringe, it probably isn't going to come up that much. So that's 7. So like best case scenario, this is like a 7/8 that you could play for 2, which sounds kind of crazy by Magic standards. Okay. Let's see. I guess I'll start with Tarmogoyf because it's the simpler of the two. 2 mana to get a giant thing potentially. Like, this card only gets better as the game progresses. You could play this early to make it just a big, annoying threat your opponent has to deal with. And then as the game goes on, it only gets bigger. And even if the game continues to go on and more card types enter the graveyard, this thing only gets bigger. But that's all it does. But it is green, and it's kind of like what green does anyway. It's just kind of like big guy, the color.
Yep, that is a green description.
I don't see this as being bad at all. Especially because the cost isn't affected. It's still 2. So if you play this later and everything's in the graveyard and this is like a 7/8 or a 6/7 or whatever, I think you're happy playing a giant thing for basically nothing in the later stages of the game. But it doesn't really like... I have to remember in like Magic and Hearthstone, creature like combat is so much more relevant than Yu-Gi-Oh! So that actually could matter quite a bit. Because you're taking on like larger like 5, 6, 7 cost things when you get to those numbers. The adversary, it's like 2 cards in 1. Well, you may sacrifice. You don't have to do it. I imagine the gimmick is you're going to try to get the ultimate of that off when you play this guy. Like, you could play it for a low cost and sacrifice like something that has like 2 or 3 or 4. Then maybe you can use the abilities. So if like you plus on both of them, what happens? They lose 4 life or discard 2 cards or 1 of each. And that could be like oppressive. This is tough.
It's so hard not to share, but I must be strong.
Of course.
I have so much to say about both these cards.
The weird thing is, it's like, I could see Tarmogoyf going both ways. I could see it being, people think this card's crazy, but it actually is bad because it just doesn't do anything. It's just a giant guy, right? And like by Yu-Gi-Oh standards, a giant guy is not good. But in creature-focused combat, that's different, I feel like. And a big body actually, especially because you have blocking too, right? Like that, you could like block with this. And I think that's also relevant potentially. But I could also could people think this card's bad? Maybe? I guess it depends on like how old it is.
When you play it with nothing in graveyards, it is a 0/1 for 2.
Which isn't great, but like how often is that going to be the case? Like surely you're going to be able to have something in grave.
On turn 2? I mean, it depends on formats. I don't want to give a ton of things away.
Sure.
I don't think it's rare to have nothing in graveyards on turn 2.
With Ob Nixilis, I keep looking at the -7 and keep thinking to myself, people looked at this and think, draw 7 cards. Like, this card has to be good. I want to find a way to like to just live the dream and draw 7. That just seems crazy to me. I could also see this maybe falling into the camp of like, this card wasn't like, people thought this card was bad, and then maybe just like the +1 of doing that twice a turn is really good starting on turn 3. Like, even if your opponent gets to like have some agency over it, and that could just be like really annoying to deal with, and it's like you don't care about the -7 at all. Anytime a card says draw 7, I feel like people are going to overhype that. Especially if you could immediately do it. Like, it's not like you have to go 5 turns, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 5 turns to get to the draw 7. You could hypothetically get a 7 power creature, then at one point play this for 3, get rid of it, and then draw 7, and then it's like you live the dream. I feel like people love seeing that. I feel like people love drawing cards. All right, here's what I think. I think Ob Nixilis was overrated, and it ended up not being very good. And I think Tarmogoyf was underrated and ended up being really good. I could maybe see people thinking that, like, kind of like what you were saying, that like maybe in the early stages this like isn't enough. But I feel like over time, Magic could get to a point where it's like the game is a lot faster, which makes Tarmogoyf better because you're fueling the graveyard a lot quicker. Because that happened with Yu-Gi-Oh! The graveyard just became like a second hand in a lot of ways. And then this card a card like this would just infinitely become better over time. So I think that's where I'm sitting on this one. Final answer.
You're not wrong about the way things age. I want to be clear. We're talking about standard. We're only talking about like the format right after these cards came out. You're gonna stick with it?
Answer at all? I guess it's just at that point it's just so contextual to. I feel like you're baiting me. Man, I feel like you're baiting me. Do I take the bait? Does it matter if it's standard? Okay, so if it's standard, maybe that does change things, because I keep thinking Yu-Gi-Oh! Is an eternal format, and I always look at things in that context. Does that matter? I guess in that context, maybe this is an example of a card that got good like way later, like maybe in like an older format, because the card pool just like grew to the point that a critical mass of cards would hit the grave to make that good, and like maybe it was bad in standard. If it's just standard, though. I'm being baited. I feel like I'm being baited.
Do you feel that strongly?
You're so evil. If my philosophy for why this card is good is that over time there's enough cards in the game for this card to be really good. I'm talking about Tarmogoyf. Looking at it through that lens, if I'm looking at it through standard, I could see people thinking this card is good, but then it's not good if there isn't enough way at the time of when this card was printed to support it, and then it just got really good over time. I'm going to stick to my guns. If I'm wrong, so be it. I'm going to stick to my guns.
And just remind me, just say it for the people.
Nixilis is overrated. Tarmogoyf was underrated.
Yep, you nailed it.
Oh my god, you're so messed up. Oh my god.
I feel like I had to because of what your last pair is going to be.
Okay.
I feel like if
fair.
I didn't say that now, it would like I need to be really clear that the last pair is heavily influenced by the thing that you said. Okay. So I like really. So anyway.
That's
This pair, Tarmogoyf had no buzz coming out, and even though Tarmogoyf was definitely not at its best in standard, it was still incredibly good because people realized you can play it on turn 2, and sure, it's nothing burger at the time, but it just playing the game, just casting a hand hate spell like a duress or a Thoughtseize, casting a lightning bolt, removing the opponent's creature, having another one of your creatures die. Tarmogoyf is suddenly a 3/4, suddenly a 4/5. And you only paid 2 mana for it. And that's really good. But the card was literally like nobody was very excited about it and became such a format staple. The copies of it approached $100 during its time in standard.
That's
which is
insane.
pretty
for a giant green idiot.
Yeah, it's seen as one of the greatest sleepers of all time because you could have pre-ordered them, I believe, at under like $5 or something so absurdly low. Yep. Honestly, I blame Tarmogoyf for a lot of what's happened to like MTG speculation finance. I think everybody's looking for the Tarmogoyf in every set. That's the card that nobody else knows is going to be insanely busted and go to the moon. And Obnixilis the Adversary, when this came out, we talked about Planeswalkers and that the 2-mana Planeswalker was unheard of. The 3-mana Planeswalker is generally very good. People thought this card was going to be absolutely busted and ruin the format. There were predictions it might be banned because the idea of getting 2 separate Planeswalkers on turn 3 was terrifying.
It's like unheard of. Course,
yeah, absolutely terrifying. And while they tend to evaluate the Punisher mechanic, like we talked about with Desecration Demon, as a bad thing, with a +1, giving the opponent a choice, right? They, in this case, thought that if there's 2 of them, well, that's got to be good. The +1 is fine, and Obnixilis was fine, and it saw a spotty play, but it was never a 4 of, like, in the best deck in the format. It was never taking over tournaments. If people thought you played Ob, they realized they just had to play removal on turn 2 and make sure the creature wasn't there, so you're just playing Ob as a 1/of. And if you're not making a copy of Ob when you play it, it's a very mediocre Planeswalker.
That's how I feel.
The -7's incredibly slow. The +1's not particularly impactful. And making a 1/1 red devil is nice, but that's not going to take over the board on its own. So that's how that one broke.
Oh, and my God. My heart.
Yeah, you got one more pair, though. You're killing it. Okay. You're absolutely crushing it.
All right.
And this one, I will say, this is the one I expect most of the comments to be about in the Rarin video. And I'm really curious how it goes with you.
I'm excited. I also think with Tarmogoyf too, before I get to those, is that I forget in Magic, like you can choose like whether or not you want to block, where like in Yu-Gi-Oh, everything basically like has taunt, where like you have to hit through everything. So it's like you have some agency as to like whether or not you want to like throw Tarmogoyf into like the line of fire. So you could just let it grow over time too, potentially, is something I always forget about. Anyway, well, these are some cards. Force of Will. This looks like a very old card. Very cool, though. 3 and 2 blue. Interrupt. I'm assuming that means it's like an instant? Or is this like a whole different mechanic?
Back in the day, interrupt was a faster instant, and they just only interrupts could interrupt interrupts. But the Magic designers would, not long after the release of this card, decide that was too confusing, and all interrupts have been retro changed to instants.
Got it. So initially it was like a counter trap, but now it's just like a regular trap. Got it.
This is an instant. Yep.
You may pay 1 life and remove a blue card in your hand from the game instead of paying Force of Will's casting cost. Effects that prevent or redirect damage cannot be used to counter this loss of life. Counter target spell. God, don't you love how old cards are worded? It's so fun.
Yeah. It's like 10 words to describe the cost, and then the actual effect is 3 words.
So it's 5 mana to counter something, or you pay a life and remove a blue card in your hand from the game to just play it for free. basically. We like free.
Free's
and
nice.
then Sheoldred, the Apocalypse. This is a very menacing looking card. 2 and 2 black, so it's 4. For a 4/5 Phyrexian Praetor. It's legendary, so you can only have one of this. Death Touch, which if I recall that if this does damage to something, it dies, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life. And whenever an opponent... Whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life. Whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. Oh, God. Okay. Again, 2 very different cards you're showing me here.
What do you think of them?
They both seem very good on the surface. At least from like how I understand Magic. Like I feel like Sheoldred in Yu-Gi-Oh would not be particularly good, if I'm being honest with you. The reason for that is like in a game like Magic or in Hearthstone, like from what I've learned doing the Rarin videos, these like 4-point life swings, and because the games go on long enough, they like that doesn't matter in Yu-Gi-Oh. Like that would just never happen. But like in Magic and Hearthstone, the games could go on long enough that actually is like a very relevant effect. Not to mention
Yu-Gi-Oh game like 5 minutes?
It's not that it's 5 minutes, is that you don't play many turns, if that makes sense. But there's a lot of things happening in that small amount of turns that does take place by modern standards. Older Yu-Gi-Oh, there were a lot of turns. But like Force of Will is like a Yu-Gi-Oh card to me. Like this is something that like would exist in Yu-Gi-Oh and like sort of does in a way. We might get to that in future videos on my channel. So to me, Force of Will reads like a really good card. But this is Magic. This isn't Yu-Gi-Oh. But I would play this in Yu-Gi-Oh. I would not play Sheoldred in Yu-Gi-Oh. I don't think it's like it would not make the cut. It's not good enough. But Force of Will is. And so if Force of Will is good enough to make the cut in Yu-Gi-Oh, how would the general community feel about this? This looks very old, so I think people's perspective could also be skewed a bit. I could see a world where like in old Magic, people read this card and think it's bad because they don't want to remove the blue card in their hand to like counter something. But that's the way I don't think you're ever casting this for 5 mana. Unless you have like way more mana than you know what to do with, I feel like you were never casting this for 5. I feel like the idea behind this card is that it's a way for you to interact with the opponent by giving up a card in order to do that. The life is like whatever. Like that's irrelevant. But I could see like old Magic thinking that this could potentially be bad because like they don't want to do that for some reason, because like old Magic games might go on long enough that is like irrelevant, where I'm used to like the fast pace of Yu-Gi-Oh, where like something like this is basically mandatory in the game. So if I assume people thought Force of Will is bad and then it was really good, I would have to assume people think Sheoldred is overhyped and wasn't as good. Do I think that's the case? The inverse is that people thought Sheoldred isn't very good and it was insane, but this card still seems very good by Magic standards because you're always drawing. There's enough turns that go on that the life loss does matter. Life swing, let's say. You guys have a lot of cards in your format that let you draw cards. Like Yu-Gi-Oh just doesn't have that very often. Cards that draw cards are very few and far between. So that just puts a tax on everything that you would draw. This, like the stats on this seem really good. The Death Touch seems really annoying because it means it's always going to like take something out.
I will say that neither of these cards would be considered bad.
Okay. It doesn't seem like it. These both seem very good. The question is, which was underrated and which was overrated? If I assume Sheoldred was underrated, I would have to assume Force of Will was overrated. And this is, again, in the context of standard, correct?
That's right.
Okay. So I need to think about that as well, because I feel like in Magic, as the game has gone on, I feel like Force of Will would become better and better over time as the speed of the game increases. So I need to think about like Sheoldred standard versus Force of Will standard and how different those games could look. With that being said, I could also see a world where people think Force of Will is going to be crazy, but then in the standard environment where Force of Will was released, it wasn't good because the format was like in such a way where this card wasn't a good card to play. I don't know what that looks like, because to me, just having a card that can do what this does seems really good. But I could see that as a world that exists, which means then people see Sheoldred as the underrated card and that this card is very good. I guess I'm trying to think, which of these do I think is the underrated card? And by that logic, I will figure out what the overrated card is.
So which of these... I mean, you kind of made the case.
I think I made
the case. Yeah, it could go either way. The question then is, how did Magic players see it?
Yeah. You guys are of a different breed.
You seem to have us all figured out so far.
I think it's more likely that people thought Sheoldred was underrated and became really good than Force of Will being underrated and thinking it's really... man, this is tough. This is really, really tough, actually. Okay. Overrated.
I'm just over here stroking the beard I don't have. The villain,
I bet.
The villain stash.
Do I feel like it's more likely Force of Will is overrated than Sheoldred could have been? If Force of Will is underrated, then that means Sheoldred has to be overrated. Okay, I'm going to go out on a limb. Force of Will seems like a card to me that was overrated at the time, and then this card got way better as Magic aged because of the way that the game... I don't know if they've reprinted this card in Standard. I feel like this was overrated on release because people are like, oh, free counterspell, this is cool, but maybe Magic was not in a place where a card like this made sense. Because old Magic is really weird. I mean, you guys have fucking Cursed Scroll as a playable card. So I think with that said, I am going to say that Force of Will was overrated. And then I'm going to say Sheoldred was underrated. And that ended up being like some crazy card. That to me makes the most sense. I feel like Force of Will is insane, but it has to be like, the game has to be in a place where it makes sense to play this card. So that's what I'm going to go with.
Final answer on the final pair.
I feel good about my choices. I've only gotten one wrong so far. If I get a second one wrong, I still feel pretty good about my win-loss here. So I will confirm the final answer. Lay it on me.
You got it.
Yes!
Yeah,
yes!
Actually nailed it.
Wow.
Amazing. Yeah,
Wow.
Force of Will, when it was revealed, was the first... It was one of 5, there was one of each color, of the first free spells that Magic had really had. I think there might have been some cards that cost 0 in the past, but they were generally low impact.
Okay.
Like Ornithopter existed, but these were powerful spells that basically had an alternate cost to play them for free. It was the first time the community had really seen that, and Force of Will was right at the top of the list as, oh my god, this destroys and changes everything.
Sure.
And by that level of hype, this card was like selling in the first week it came out at like $25, which is infinite money back in mid-90s something for this game. Sure. And it didn't due very much to Standard. Like, Standard wasn't in a place for this, like you kind of speculated, because it required a blue card to be pitched, and there weren't enough good blue cards. Like, the density of blue that you could run in Standard at the time wasn't very dense. There weren't that many blue cards that you could play, and the color couldn't survive on its own, because blue at the time didn't have reliable removal. It didn't have meaningful, useful interaction. So it really relied on countering everything. And the problem with countering everything with this card was you had to exile another blue card, which meant you were basically 2-for-1ing yourself.
Sure.
And the card advantage and Standard at the time was not as good. So, yeah, Force of Will, when it came out, did not like shape Standard. It would go on to have wonderful decks down the line. It would go on to be an absolute rock star. It was never reprinted in Standard ever again because it's way too busted for vintage formats, Commander, Legacy. Like, every format now where Force of Will is legal, it is played a lot.
Okay.
But in Standard, when it came out, I would say it was overhyped before release. Now, obviously, if you could go back and buy Force of Will for $25, I'm saying it's overrated at the time, but you would do that because now these are like $120 even after some reprints. But it didn't shape Standard. I remember everybody thought that Alliance's Standard was going to be all about Force of Will, and actually the more played card from the cycle was the black card, because at the time black was the most powerful popular color with access to the best card advantage. On the other hand, Children of the Apocalypse, I still can't believe this, because as you see, that it's 2022. You'd think we learned something, but the Magic community, not everybody, there were some people who weren't on this bandwagon, but the Magic community, for the most part, didn't think this was a good card. It did not make a ton of top 10 lists. People very much thought it would just die to some removal spell, and it didn't have an enters the battlefield trigger, which is what most people grade their creatures by in Magic. When it comes in, does it do something when it lands? Because it's just going to die to removal. Yeah. So when people saw Shieldred, they just kind of didn't think much of it. But the way that Shieldred worked out is it was too big for a lot of the popular removal, and if they didn't have it, if maybe they used it on your 3-mana creature and then you followed up with Shieldred, this card closed and warped the game very quickly. It's almost impossible to race on the battlefield because every turn you're gaining and they're losing, and if they're trying to use card draw to draw their way into the solution, it kills them on the way. And Children of the Apocalypse, I think everybody would agree, was grossly underrated in previous season, with some notable streamers saying it was bad. I think I said it was bad the first time I saw it. And but I mean, you nailed it. So you are a solver of metas, it seems. Or you're just that good at understanding what Magic players get way too hyped about. You did really good.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I think there are a lot of like similarities between how Magic players and Yu-Gi-Oh players rate cards. Even though our games are like fundamentally different, we still sort of look for the same things. And like the Force of Will thing is funny because I feel like looking at a lot of these cards, I feel like we would play none of these in Yu-Gi-Oh, but like Force of Will is a card I've seen. It's like we would play this in, like, this is a Yu-Gi-Oh card if I've ever seen it. And that's just like a testament to like how crazy our game is, like comparatively, that like that's the only card out of everything else here that I'm like, yeah, that's like probably playable for us.
All right, quick spoiler section. If you didn't see the Rarin one yet and you don't want to be spoiled, you can turn off right here. So how many do you think Rarin got?
I've been kind of ragging on him this whole time. I want to say he got some of these, surely. So you showed me what, 7 sets? 1, 2,
7.
3, 4,
yep.
5.
You got 6 out of 7.
I don't think. I'm going to go with I'll be nice. I'll say he got 4.
You think he got 4?
I think he got 4. He knows some card games. Surely he got 4.
Try again.
Is it higher or lower? Or do I not get to know?
It's lower.
Okay. 3?
Try again.
2?
That's our boy. You want to take a shot at which ones Rarin got?
Ooh. I want to say maybe he got the Tarmogoyf one. That seems like
that's
a
one of
Hearthstone
them.
I feel like that's a Hearthstone, like a good Hearthstone card. That's why that makes sense. And then maybe he got the first one with the divide by 0.
So the only difference in presentation was I gave him that one last.
Okay.
And the one he actually got was the Curse Scroll Demi-Lich one.
Interesting. Okay, which is funny because that's, I mean, I ended up getting that too, but I was like really torn on that one. Yeah.
So, so you have well represented the Yu-Gi-Oh community. Thanks for playing Underrated, Overrated. You're the champion on this occasion, but we'll see what happens next time. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a ton of fun.